I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight to hear about the perils of plastics from our distinguished panel of speakers. I'd like to thank the City of Beachwood for providing this lovely venue for us, and I'd like to thank Michelle Miller and her staff for being so helpful in setting it up. Everything looks great. I want to thank the sponsors for our event tonight. The sponsors are Friends of Crooked River, Bluestone Heights, Chagrin River Watershed Partners, Cuyahoga River Restoration, Cuyahoga Soil and Water, Doan Brook Water Conservation District, Highland Heights Green Task Force, Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District, Nature Conservancy, and West Creek Conservancy. And I'd also like to give a special thanks to the Cuyahoga Committee for Arts and Culture. They're a major sponsor of tonight's event. And a very special thanks goes out to the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. Their generous support makes nearly all of the previous watersheds that I mentioned, makes all of their work possible, and our work as well in Friends of Euclid Creek. They're the basic funder for all of this. So thank you, and it's really thank all of us. We're the people who are paying those fees. But this is the kind of events that we can put on because of what the sewer district does. So I invite everybody to grab some food and some dessert and coffee if you haven't done so already. I'd like to point out that tonight's event is a zero waste event. There's one trash receptacle located in the back of the room. Myring is pointing it out, and that is for trash. Everything else that we're using tonight is compostable or reusable. And those compostable dishes are going to be taken away after this event by the Rust Belt Riders, which is a company that's in Cuyahoga County, and you can make use of their services. They will come out and they will take your compostables. And I want to thank Cathi Lehn for insisting on making this a zero waste event. Some of you may recall the old days, 40 or 50 years ago, and we didn't have the problem of disposable dishes. Everything was served on real platters and consumed on real dishes with real glasses, utensils, and napkins. Things got cleaned and reused, and not much got thrown away. In a partial move back in that direction, you may have noticed that tonight we're using actual serving trays, platters, and bowls. And I want to thank Chris Laskin for contributing some of her serving pieces. And for the rest of that, we can thank my late mother, Naomi Rapport, from whom I inherited the silver platters. And that was largely because my siblings didn't want them. So welcome back to the future. Hopefully we'll start a trend tonight. Since last October, when I first discussed with Judy Dearden the possibility of bringing Dr. Sherri Mason back to Cleveland to share her very important message about plastic in the environment with the environmental community here, I had no idea how enormously popular this topic was going to be in the current year. It seems everywhere you look, whether it's in newspapers, on TV, YouTube, our news feeds, everywhere you look, the perils of plastic are in the news. For example, last week I was reading an article in the USA Today about a young man who was scuba diving when he was in high school off the coast of Greece. And he was so disgusted by the amount of trash that was in the water that after graduating high school, he decided to devote his time and energy to cleaning up the ocean, cleaning up the 5 great garbage patches that are in the ocean. So he has raised millions of dollars for this project, and it seems we're drowning in our own plastic, and so are the plants and animals on this planet, who are really truly the innocent victims of our avalanche of garbage. In the same article, it says that we humans put millions of tons of plastic into the ocean every year, which is why some environmentalists are questioning the usefulness of this young man's efforts, which is called the ocean cleanup, because without putting a stop to all that garbage that's going into the ocean every year, we can really never expect to make any progress, and he can't expect to clean it up. And that is where the rest of us come in. I'm sure that you're all concerned about the trashing of our environment, otherwise you probably wouldn't be here tonight. While that's, and you may think that we're just preaching to the choir, because we're all environmentalists. But while that's probably true, I think there's another way of looking at it. I prefer to think of tonight as preaching to the teachers. We're the people who are going to send this message out to the rest of the world. And that is why we're here tonight. We're going to learn the most current information that is available about the state of the environment from a panel of 4 experts, and then we're going to pass that information on to the rest of the world through public education programs, to the members of our organizations, and to our family and friends. So tonight we're very pleased to have 4 distinguished speakers. First is Dr. Cathi Lehn from the Cleveland Department of Sustainability. There'll be Diane Bickett, the director of the Cuyahoga Solid Waste District, County Councilwoman Sunny Simon, and Dr. Sherri Mason. The plan is to be done by about 8:30. So we have a lot to do. Our first 2 speakers will speak for about 20 minutes, give or take. Councilwoman Simon will give a quick update on the relevant pending legislation regarding plastic bags, and then we'll hear from our special guest, Dr. Mason. Since this is a teaching session, I want to leave some time for all of you to ask questions at the end. So we're going to have a panel at the end of the presentations, where all of you will have a chance to ask questions. And I have a mic up here where I'll be passing around so you guys can ask questions. So, any questions? No. All right. The first up is Dr. Cathi Lehn. Cathi serves as the Sustainable Cleveland Manager with the City of Cleveland's Mayor's Office of Sustainability. Her role in the office is to connect with neighborhood residents and community partners. Cathy's passion focuses on raising awareness about the threat of plastic pollution in our waters. She coordinates the Great Lake Erie Boat Float and is now planning for the 10th annual boat float at Edgewater Park, which will be upcoming on Saturday, September 8th. She's also the chair of Sustainable Cleveland Plastic Reduction Working Group. Tonight, Cathi will be speaking on the efforts of the City of Cleveland to deal with the problems of plastic waste. I also want to mention that if you want more information on any of these topics, we have information tables around the room. There's plenty of information on the topics that we'll be discussing, and also other information, so please feel free to take a pamphlet with you and share it with whoever you feel needs to know. So first off, please welcome Dr. Cathi Lehn.
Good evening. Thank you for your patience, and thank you all for being here tonight. As Ken mentioned, my name's Cathi Lehn. I'm the Sustainable Cleveland Manager for the Mayor's Office of Sustainability for the City of Cleveland. What I'd like to spend a couple minutes doing this evening is introducing you first to Sustainable Cleveland, and then let you know about some initiatives that we have started in our office along with our many partners. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Sustainable Cleveland. Our tagline is that we're building a thriving green city on a blue lake. This is the definition of Sustainable Cleveland 2019. This is our mission. And there's a very important word I just want to point out, and that is together. This is not an initiative to build a green city on a blue lake that the city is taking on by itself. We are partnering with many different partners. Those are organizations. They're also residents. Many of you are also our partners. So Sustainable Cleveland 2019 Many have asked, why 2019? Why not 2020 or 2030? And this slide gives you a hint. Next year, we're celebrating a very important anniversary. It'll be the 50th anniversary of the last burning of the Cuyahoga River. On June 22nd, the river burned for the last time. There just happened to be a reporter from Time magazine in Cleveland on that day. This photo is not from that fire. It's probably from one of the fires in 1950, because the river had burned 13 times before 1969. And it wasn't just our river that was burning. Rivers were burning throughout the country, throughout the world. But that Time magazine article enraged the country. People were asking, how can our rivers be burning? This is awful. And so action was taken. The EPA was formed, the Clean Water Act was passed, and we celebrated our first Earth Day. So next year, in 2019, along with our many partners, there are going to be a lot of parties. We're going to be partying on the river. Definitely June 22nd, which just happens to be a Saturday, is going to be a very busy weekend. So we're going to party on the river. We're also going to party on land. So be watching for how you can celebrate with us, because the river has come a long way. We have come a long way. On September 20th and 21st, in about a month, we're going to celebrate the 10th annual Sustainable Cleveland Summit. We're going to have breakout sessions on the 21st, and one of those breakout sessions is going to be about how do we celebrate next year? So we want to hear your ideas. We're also going to talk about how can we help to improve the quality of the lake and many other topics. So I hope you can join us on September 20th and 21st. But we're here tonight to talk about plastics. So I want to just take a few minutes to talk about some of the initiatives that we're involved in through the Office of Sustainability. So we know, and we're going to hear later tonight, that there's a lot of different ways that we can address the threat of plastic pollution in our waterways. And this just mentions a few of those ways. In 2015, at the Sustainable Cleveland Summit, we celebrated the Year of Clean Water. Each year leading up to 2019, we celebrate a different sustainability topic. For instance, this year is the Year of Vital Neighborhoods. But in 2015, it was the Year of Clean Water. One of the outcomes of our annual summits is to form working groups so that the ideas and goals that are generated during the summit can continue throughout the year and for years to come. So in 2015, we formed the Sustainable Cleveland Plastic Reduction Working Group. The goal of that working group is to educate residents of Northeast Ohio about plastic pollution, especially in our water, and encourage residents to take small, meaningful steps to reduce single-use disposable plastics. I have here on the slide just a few of our partners, and there's also many residents that are part of this working group also. So one of the initiatives that we're starting with this year are with straws and the Skip the Straw campaign. Why straws? Straws are in the top 10 plastic items picked up on beach cleanups around the world. So that's one reason. Straws and other food-related items are in the top 10. But also, if you've been paying any attention to the news lately, there are a lot of different initiatives skipping the straw, whether it's Starbucks or Bon Appetit or countries such as Taiwan or Seattle that's just banned plastic straws and utensils. Also, one of our local restaurants, Melt, has adopted a Skip the Straw campaign. So we partnered with the Ocean Conservancy and their Skip the Straw campaign. If you can see on this slide, we added the logo, Protect Our Great Lakes, so that it wasn't just about the ocean, because we wanted to bring it home. And on the bottom is the URL for a blog on Sustainable Cleveland. It'll tell you more about the campaign. Also, I've been trying to keep up with the many articles that are in the news, and we also have resources listed. So we also, as a group, decided what our talking points were for the campaign, because we wanted to make sure that we all had the same message. And those talking points are: Lake Erie is a source of our drinking water. The majority of trash in the water comes from land. Food-related items make up a high percentage of the trash in the water. Most trash is plastic. There is an easy solution, and that is to start reducing our single-use disposable products. Businesses can actually save money if they quit just giving you a straw, even if you don't want one. So we're asking businesses not to ban straws, but to only provide a straw when it's requested. And that's our Skip the Straw campaign. We're also partnering with Surfrider Foundation and their Northern Ohio chapter, which was just created a few months ago, and creating a lake-friendly restaurant recognition program, building off of their ocean-friendly restaurant program. What their ocean-friendly restaurant program does is ask that the following 4 criteria are followed. One is no styrofoam, that they do recycle properly, that utensils are only given for takeout food upon request, and that no plastic bags are used. So those are the criteria they must follow. And then they need to choose a minimum of 3 of these additional criteria. Plastic straws provided only upon request, no beverages in plastic bottles, a discount offered if you bring in your own mug, vegetarian and vegan food options are offered, water conservation efforts are implemented, and energy efficiency efforts are also put in place. And I want to point out that the Skip the Straw campaign will be an important part of this initiative. So more to come on that soon. Another initiative I want to tell you about is one that is coming from our office. It's called Don't Break the Lake. It's a social marketing campaign that's being federally funded through NOAA's Marine Debris Program. So this campaign focuses on reusable grocery bags and refillable bottles. That's the main focus. Because it's a social marketing campaign, one of the things we needed to do was identify the barriers to a desired behavior. Those behaviors were to bring your own reusable bag to the grocery store and to bring a reusable bottle, such as this, wherever you go. So we contracted with Ohio Sea Grant to conduct an online survey to find out what are the barriers to these behaviors for both the reusable bag and for the refillable bottle. And guess what they found? Not surprisingly, they found that we just forget. So what this campaign is going to do is to produce promotional materials that will help remind you to bring your reusable bag and your refillable bottle. So we produced rack cards and magnets, and we have some up on the plastic pollution display table. But also, and this is something I'm very excited about, we partnered with a local grocery store, Zagara's Marketplace, who also provided the catering for tonight's event. And I was very pleased working with John Zagara. Everything I suggested, he was all for. And Sunny maybe can correct me, but I believe John Segura was the only grocery store owner that testified for the carryout bag fee. So he's all for this. One of the things I was especially excited about is he's going to allow me to meet with his staff and give a training session about why this issue is so important, because they're on the front line. So they need to understand why this is important. So John has created this special Don't Break the Lake bag. We are going to have a giveaway set up in the lobby for a couple days, and he'll also be selling these bags. All proceeds from the sale of these bags will go to organizations helping to improve the health of the lake. So this is something we're really excited about. And lastly, I want to mention a couple events that are coming up. Ken already mentioned the Great Lake Erie Boat Float. It'll be held at Edgewater Park Beach, Saturday, September 8th. This is the 10th annual. I can't believe it's been that many years, and we can see the creativity in Northeast Ohio with some of these boats. You can see here the hamster wheel that the Sea Scouts created, and the swan. We have a special guest judge also. Dr. Marcus Erickson, co-founder and research director with the Five Gyres Institute, will be a judge. Marcus is also co-founder of the boat float. So he was here for the first boat float, and he'll be here for the 10th. I also mentioned the Sustainable Cleveland Summit. I hope you can all join us. I have some postcards on the display table, and I'm happy to tell you more about it if you'd like. And you can also go to sustainablecleveland.org and lakeerieboatfloat.org or contact me. Thank you all for your attention.
Our next speaker tonight is Diane Bickett. Diane is the Executive Director of Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District, also known as Cuyahoga Recycles. The Solid Waste District is a public agency which aims at helping people reduce, reuse, and recycle at home, at work, and in their communities. Over the past 28 years, Diane has been talking trash about trash, implementing programs that reduce the environmental impact of waste. 3 of her most recent projects have included developing the Cuyahoga County Special Waste Convenience Center in order to manage home electronics and hazardous household waste. She's leading the countywide effort to re-educate the public about recycling. She'll be talking about that tonight. And she helped form the Cuyahoga County Environmental Crimes Task Force to crack down on illegal dumping. Diane is the past president of the Solid Waste Association of America, Buckeye Chapter, and her topic this evening will be the problem of wish cycling, which is something I've been guilty of. Please welcome Director Diane Bickett.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Ken, for the invitation to come be a part of this panel with these esteemed women. I was invited here tonight to really just kind of update everybody on some recent changes around recycling. You've seen a lot of the news stories, perhaps maybe in the Plain Dealer or in Scene Magazine, and maybe some of the national news stories. Thank you. So I decided to call my talk The Problem of Wish Cycling because it kind of properly frames the changes going on with recycling right now. So what is wish cycling? Well, we've all been there. You're standing in front of a recycling container and you're holding a berry container, or you're holding a Starbucks cup or a greasy pizza box, and you're not entirely sure what to do with it. Can you recycle it or not? But if you're confused, you're probably going to toss it into your recycling anyway, hoping that it will get recycled. You rather err on the side of caution rather than toss something in the trash. And we're all guilty of it because we're all avid recyclers, I'm sure, here in this room. But when you do that, we assume that the people at the recycling plant will either figure out what to do with it, or they will sort it out for us. And that's what wish cycling is. But it's a problem because our local processing facilities report that people contaminate their recycling by putting non-recyclable items into their curbside bins. And this is a problem because it wastes time, it wastes money, and it's truly going to threaten the sustainability of our curbside recycling programs. So what is considered contamination? The problem of recycling contamination goes well beyond the errant berry container that shouldn't be there. I mean, people are really putting some crazy stuff in the recycling bins. We talk with the material recovery facilities that handle this material, and they're finding bowling balls, and they're finding garden hoses, and they're finding batteries that they're catching fire. They're finding shredded paper and just all sorts of crazy stuff. Propane tanks and scrap metal, things that go well beyond the common list of materials that we promote that should go in there. And we'll talk a little bit about what those are. So a lot of the things are either hazardous to the employees that work at these plants. People are putting syringes in there thinking, well, it's metal, it can be recycled. Or they're putting things that are problematic. So the key problem would be plastic bags and other things that tangle up in the sortation equipment, and other things that have low value materials. And I look at the picture on the far right, which is that pile of plastic stuff that we all wish could be recycled that really has no market value at all, and especially in light of some changing market conditions. Really, when it comes to plastic, while we produce so much of it, only about 9% is actually truly recyclable, and that's a big problem. So recycling contamination has been a problem for a while, but the reason it's the focus of a lot of news stories recently is because of China. Has anybody heard about the National Sword? Excellent. Last year, in 2017, China announced that it will stop importing about 24 different kinds of recyclable materials. And the things that they are still willing to accept must be so low in contamination, it is less than 0.5%. And that's truly an impossible standard for our local processors to meet. So bottom line is China had been taking this material from us for decades. They would take all this mixed plastic and mixed paper and other contaminated items, including things like electronics, and they would use cheap labor to sort that material out. And that material ended up getting dumped on a riverbank or just, causing a trash problem in their country. So China wants to clean up their country, and rightly so. But that ban, the National Sword, is affecting curbside recycling programs all across this country and even the world. So it's truly had a ripple effect as our local recyclers are struggling to find alternative markets. So really the importance of China to the world's recycling industry cannot be understated. This slide shows that prior to the National Sword policy, we were exporting about 70% of all of our fiber to be recycled. And about 58% of all of our plastic to be recycled. And those materials would then come back to us in the form of goods that we would then buy. But now that market has really dropped to almost nearly zero. And along with that, the market prices have tumbled as the supply of recyclable materials now exceeds demand. So how is this affecting us here locally? Well, this is what the 3 material recovery facilities that process our curbside recycling want us all to know. And the key thing is that there are limits to curbside recycling. We all wish we could recycle everything, but there are just some limits to what our curbside programs are designed to manage. And I'm talking specifically about curbside programs now because there are other recycling options for some materials that are really not as affected by this China National Sword policy as much. But the one thing they want you to know is that only certain materials are recoverable through curbside recycling. So once the material leaves the curb, after you put it in your container, it goes to either the Kimball sortation plant in Twinsburg, the Waste Management sortation plant in Akron, or the Republic sortation plant in Oberlin. And all these plants use similar type of technology that has eddy currents and optical sortation and a variety of conveyor belts and magnets and things to sort out your containers. And when I say containers, it's containers and fiber, not designed to sort out syringes and garden hoses and bowling balls. So they want you to stick to the 5 main categories. And yes, the recycling rules have changed over time because recycling is truly driven by economics. The only way we can really recycle something is if there's a market demand for it on the other end, meaning that there's a manufacturer who can use that material to produce a new good. So that will affect what we can put in our curbside bins. And improper recycling, finally, does threaten the sustainability of our programs, because if those 3 facilities I mentioned, if those companies have to sort out all the garbage that people tend to put in their bins, either because they're wish cycling or they just don't care to learn the rules, then that will affect the cost effectiveness of those programs and the long-term sustainability. So what are the rules for recycling? So at the Solid Waste District, we've met with all the processors, and they tell us that these are the 5 core items that they want. And any metal can, good markets for those. Milk cartons and the juice cartons are recyclable. Glass bottles and jars, paper and boxes, and then finally, when we get to plastics, we're telling folks plastic bottles and jugs only. Now, this might conflict with some information your hauler might be sending you, or even some of your cities might be sending you, but we know that bottles and jugs are the materials that still have value and still have domestic markets, so we know those things are getting recycled. If you throw the other mixed plastics in there, we know that China no longer takes it. There's very little domestic capacity to recycle that, and it actually has a negative value. So we can't guarantee that any of that other material, unfortunately, is able to be recycled. So cans, cartons, glass, paper and boxes, and plastic bottles and jugs. And some general rules is that we want items loose, not bagged, in the recycling carts. Now, if you're a Cleveland Heights resident, you might have to bag. They still have a blue bag program. You might still have to bag that material to set it out, but don't throw your Heinen's, Heinen's bags and all that stuff in your curbside recycling. No film plastic. Containers should be empty and rinsed, and then caps should either be screwed back on the container or thrown away, because those cannot be sorted at the plant. And then finally, break down your boxes. Everyone's getting stuff from Amazon, and those boxes should be cut up and put in the carts and not be set out, those big giant furniture boxes next to the cart, because they're problematic at the plant as well. And then just finally, some tips. The recycling rules are really the same across Cuyahoga County in terms of what you should be putting out for curbside recycling. So it's the same as Westlake as Beachwood, those 5 categories of items. I think we try to overthink recycling, and it's really very simple when you follow the basic guidelines. Finally, there are other recycling options for a variety of materials. For instance, your shredded paper should be taken to a paper-only drop-off. You'll see the green and yellow bins in the parking lots of schools and churches. There are ample opportunities to recycle electronics. There's plenty of places to donate your old clothing. There's a great information card on the back table that has some additional resources for you, especially with regards to searching for items on our website, which is cuyahogarecycles.org. And then finally, I can't say this enough, we really, there are limits to recycling. We're not going to recycle our way out of our waste problem. So we do have to practice waste reduction, and we have to compost, and we have to donate, and we have to become more thrifty and less consumer oriented as a society, because we just create way too much waste, and not all of it can be recycled. So if you look for more information, here's ways to connect with us on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and also on LinkedIn. And our website, again, is cuyahogarecycles.org. There's a great search feature on there where you can type in something that you're trying to figure out what to do with, and we provide a list of local options. So thank you very much.
Our next speaker is County Councilwoman Sunny Simon, who will give us a legislative update on the political fight over plastic bags. Councilwoman Simon has been a member of County Council since 2011. She currently chairs the Environmental Education and Sustainability Committee. She led the creation of the Cuyahoga County Sustainability Department, and she has currently introduced legislation, along with Councilman Dale Miller, to encourage the reduced use of single-use plastic bags, which, unless you have a cat or a dog, they rarely get used again before they end up in our trees. So please welcome Councilwoman Sunny Simon.
Well, good evening. I'm very honored to be here with all of you. Plastic reduction has become my passion. When I started looking at this issue as the inaugural District 11 representative, one of my first ideas was to incorporate a fee on plastic and paper in the Cuyahoga County new government. When I launched that idea, little did I know that the resistance from the community was way more than I ever imagined. It was as if Armageddon was going to be upon us. I was, torturing people and making their lives miserable. So I never received so much hate mail in my entire life over a fee on a plastic bag. So needless to say, I backed off from that in 2011, but kept my eye on the ball and was able to see that every single year that communities around the world, around the globe, were implementing either a fee or a ban. The consciousness was changing, and so I was determined to harness that new consciousness and introduce legislation. I want to thank the panel here tonight as being my partners and my teachers, enabling me to move forward with the knowledge sufficient, I think, to introduce the legislation. I also wanted to thank Mayor Horowitz of the city of Beachwood. Is he still here? Mayor Horowitz was here tonight to hear as much as he could, and I also wanted to recognize Jane Goodman, a city councilwoman who's also director of the Cuyahoga River Restoration, who was also a teacher of mine. But in 2017, in September, I introduced the ordinance 2017-0006. And part of the reason why was some of these images you're going to see on the screen is just the mounds of plastic that surround us and the world. This is not a real whale. I showed it to Executive Budish, and he questioned whether it was real. In fact, it is an installation piece, I believe, in Denmark that exhibits the reality of what the plastic's doing to our wildlife. And this replicates an actual sighting of whales that we're seeing more frequently that consume the plastic as they eat on the ocean floor. And they starve to death because the plastic fills their stomachs and they end up just starving a horrible death. As Diane Bickett mentioned, China no longer wants our trash, and so there's no place for the plastic to go. So the purpose of the legislation is to reduce the amount of plastic in Cuyahoga County. And in Cuyahoga County alone, that residents use an average of 319 million single-use plastic bags each year. That's a lot of plastic. I have a demonstration of these bags at my office that I keep in my office, and there's huge 3 bags of plastic that I keep there, so when people walk by, they're always reminded of what they're doing with these bags. And by the way, all of those bags came from the county administration building. We just went into the cupboards and were able to extract 400 very easily. So we know, I'll let Dr. Mason speak on the numbers around the world, but in our own backyard, we sit on a Great Lake. And as an elected official, it's my belief that I have a duty to do everything in my power as an elected official to protect the lake, because it's the most precious resource that we have in the county and around the world to have fresh lake water. When we know around the world people are struggling, and South Africa, for example, was one of the first countries to experience lack of water, and what that did to that country is just the future if we don't shape up. So the actual, here, this is it. When I'm told that Armageddon's coming, I show the slide of all of the countries around the world, all the cities in the United States, South America, who have implemented either a fee or a ban. So we're not alone, and these countries continue to exist and the people continue to thrive despite the absence of a plastic bag, believe it or not. Israel just actually implemented in 2017. So the ordinance quickly imposes a fee of 10 cents for every plastic or paper bag at the establishment, and retail establishments are a size of 7,000 square feet. So these are the Walgreens, the CVS's, the most grocery stores, and the larger retail. And we have some exemptions to this, which would be if you're at a pharmacy or dry cleaner or at a buying meat, you'll be able to have your bags. So it defines it. The county would administer the fee, and what the fee would be used for is an environmental remediation fund. And most of the fee would go toward cleanup of rivers, of our lake, and put youth to work. My vision is that we would have young people employed who strive to get jobs, but there's so few. And we would set this up for them to actually get living, minimum wage and more, to learn about the environment. And during the winter months, we would educate them on resume building. So I believe it's a win-win to get the youth out into the streets and to the lakes and then start to appreciate nature, to get a wage and clean up our community. Part of the fee as well would go back to retail, so they'd have an ability to train their staff, and Cathi might be right up there with the training of the trainers of that. And reusable bags. So I wanted to make sure that anybody who could not afford to pay the 10 cents or afford to buy a reusable bag would have the ability to get a free one. So it was my intention to get stock up at senior centers, and throughout the county, everybody would have a chance to get their reusable bags. So there's really no excuses in my mind. So just quickly, there's also an exemption for people on public assistance because there was concern about people who could not afford. So that would be part of this. But what was interesting as I researched the commonality and the similarity of tobacco, I was curious about that because I see these two issues aligned. I went back and researched in the 1950s and 60s what the arguments were against putting any labels, for example, on cigarette packs. And it's so similar to what's going on with the plastic industry. So tobacco, they talk about the tax on cigarettes being regressive and how it's going to hurt. But what we've seen with the tobacco tax is that there's a huge reduction in the use of tobacco in Cuyahoga County, where we depended on that with arts and culture. It's going down, and we see at some point it's just going to diminish. And that would be the goal of this bag fee, is not to have a steady stream of income, but to eventually have no money coming in, because we know that the use of these bags goes down significantly, on average of 70%. So this is not a minor process. It actually influences behavior significantly. But what was interesting to me is the American Progressive Bag Alliance is this formed as this pseudoscience group that goes around the country trying to argue against the perils of plastic pollution. And they've come up with every kind of reason why or how the science doesn't support what plastic's doing to human health, environmental health, and the wildlife. The Tobacco Institute did the same thing. They came up with scientists who would be able to testify about how tobacco itself and secondhand smoke was not deleterious. And we see such a similarity. And actually, I forgot who was in my committee, Myring. We had a guy come from the American Progressive Bag Alliance to my committee who pulled out all his bags of tricks to try to influence my colleagues on the committee. But these are just some images of plastic and what we see every day. But the status, is why I'm here to speak very quickly, is that this has been in committee since 2017 in September. It's a year, and I am really working to get the votes. I'm short a couple votes, and it's staying in committee until that happens. But we also have discussions in the committee and on council of committee members and council members who are looking at a ban on plastic and rather than a fee. So that's something that we might see amendments on and see where that goes. But it's a complicated process. You want to include all the stakeholders. I have to handhold every aspect of this and make sure that somehow everybody has a say and understands. But the key is education, and that's why I appreciate Sustainable Cleveland and Cathy's work. And of course, Dr. Mason, I want to give you the floor because you're the inspiration and really the driving force behind everything I think we do here with your information that you bring to us. So thank you very much and stay tuned.
Our special guest speaker tonight is Dr. Sherri Mason. A native of Texas, Dr. Mason earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin. She completed her doctorate in chemistry at the University of Montana as a NASA Earth System Science Scholar. She's currently professor of chemistry and the chair of the Department of Geology and Environmental Science at the State University of New York in Fredonia. As the principal investigator on the very first survey of plastic pollution within the open waters of the Great Lakes, her research group was the first to study the prevalence and impact of plastic pollution within fresh water ecosystems. She's been featured on the BBC, in The Guardian, The New York Times, The Huffington Post, on National Public Radio's All Things Considered, and on Studio 1A. The Great Lakes Plastic Pollution Survey formed the basis for the Microbeads Free Water Act, which was signed into law by President Obama on December 2015, which bans the manufacture and use of microbeads within personal care products and which took effect last month. As a law and not a regulation, I'd like to point out, it is immune from the current administration's wrath. In April 2016, as the result of a nomination from U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, Dr. Mason was named a 2016 EPA Environmental Champion. Most recently, the World Health Organization has called for a human impact study based on the work of her lab, looking at microplastic contamination within the common consumables such as tap water, bottled water, beer, and sea salt. She's currently a member of the Joint United Nations Working Group, which is busy developing guidelines for the terminology and methodologies of sampling and analyzing plastic pollution. Please welcome Dr. Sam Mason.
I really need to shorten my bio because after hearing that every time I go, gosh, now I have to follow that. I'm setting the sights really, really high. But thank you all for being here on a Tuesday night. I'm sure we all have better things we could be doing, especially when it's so incredibly beautiful outside and our summers here are so incredibly short. So I really appreciate you being here to learn and as Ken pointed out, to become the teachers, because it's, I think, a very important aspect of what we have before us is that each one of us has a huge sphere of influence, and we should not underestimate that. So we are not acting alone, even though frequently when I go to the grocery store and I'm the only one with my reusable bags, or I'm sitting in Starbucks and I'm the only one with my reusable mug, and I feel so incredibly alone. I remember moments like this when I look into an audience of 100+ people and I go, I'm not alone, right? Each one of us is a sphere of influence. And by bringing my mug, bringing my bags, I'm showing people that this isn't some freaky thing that, you have to be some kind of weird, crazy hipster, I don't know, that everyday people do this and that it's not that hard. Right. And I talk to people. I talk to people all the time. Right. And that's what I'm here today to do with you guys, to talk about plastic. And we all know this term plastic, right? We all are sitting on plastic chairs, drinking out of cornstarch based, compostable, but plastic cups, right? We all know plastic, but I always like to give kind of a primer because I think if you ask a lot of people what is plastic, they don't actually really know. Right? And plastic is a synthetic polymer. That's what we mean when we use the term plastic. We're referring to synthetic polymers, so they're man-made, based on oil, right? They're based, though, the idea of them came because they're modeled off of naturally occurring polymers. So cornstarch, right? Cellulose is a naturally occurring polymer. A polymer, think of as a train, and how a train is composed of these individual cars that are linked together to make the big train, right? It's the same idea here with polymers. They are long chains of molecules. So we link together monomers, or individual molecules, small molecules. We link them together to make the polymer. So in this case here, I'm showing you polyethylene that is comprised from linking together ethylene molecules, okay, through the polymerization process to make that train. 50% of plastics that are manufactured are polyethylene. This is the most common plastic that's manufactured. It's manufactured as high-density polyethylene and low-density polyethylene, okay? But this is the most common plastic that is manufactured in terms of synthetic polymers. What makes this a material so attractive, and the reason it's become so prominent in our society, is its industrial kind of properties. It's very moldable, so you can make anything from a baby doll. This was actually manufactured not from polyethylene. This was one of the first products that was manufactured using synthetic polymers. Buttons to a bottle of water, all from the same material. And there's no other material out there that can do that is that versatile. You can't do this with glass. You can't do this with metal. You can't do this with wood, but you can do it with plastic. So from an industrial standpoint, that makes this material so incredibly attractive. Add on to that, it's very lightweight. So once you make that product, transporting it from the point of manufacture to the point of sale is much easier, and it's durable. It's not likely to break along the way, right? So you can understand from an industrial standpoint why they like this material. It makes sense, right? Ironically, those same properties that make it so attractive from an industrial standpoint are what of a concern when it comes to the environment. It's very lightweight. When it's accidentally released into the environment, it can be transported for very, very long distances. So there was a study came out about 2 years ago. As the polar ice caps are melting, literally millions of tons of plastic are being re-released into the environment. How did it end up in the polar ice cap? This is man-made, right? It got transported there through air and water, right? And it ends up getting encased. It's durable. So as it's traveling in this long path, it's not breaking down, okay? Unlike natural materials, right? Natural materials biodegrade. That is, there are microorganisms that can use natural materials as food, chew them up, and turn it into soil, right? That's what's going to happen with our compostable stuff today. We're going to take it to an industrial composting facility where there are microorganisms that can chew up that cornstarch and make compost, make soil out of it. This doesn't happen with plastics, okay? Synthetic plastics aren't biodegradable. There aren't microorganisms that can use them as food because they aren't natural. Right? So microorganisms weren't growing expecting to use this as a food, and so they didn't evolve to use this as a food. And instead, plastics undergo a process that's called photodegradation, where sunlight will act to make the plastics brittle, and then mechanical actions such as cars driving over them, or people stepping on them, or wind and water pounding on them over time, trees tearing into them, right, will cause them to break into these smaller and smaller pieces. So you have macro items that turn into mesoplastics that turn into microplastics. But all along the way, those polymers that we talked about at the very beginning, still the same. Very, very little has happened chemically, right? I'm a chemist, to those polymers through this whole process. Okay, so even as it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, it's still plastic. It was invented at the dawn of the 20th century, but it wasn't until World War II that the infrastructure for the mass production of plastics took place. And as part of the war movement, and when the war movement ended, industry turned its attention to the consumer. This is an iconic 1955 Time Life magazine ad, Throwaway Living. This is iconic, and you look at the subheading, disposable items cut down on household chores. This really marks in our society a change from my grandparents' day, where it was one of reusing, repurposing materials. When we had to move my grandparents out of their houses, they had tinfoil balls like this and rubber band balls. And I mean, everything was saved, right? You don't see that anymore. It's all throw away, throw away, throw away, right? We've moved from a society of reusing to disposability. And it happened intentionally. And this is kind of the starting point, right? And why? I mean, why? Doesn't it make sense? I mean, doesn't it sound attractive? You don't have to wash dishes anymore, right? You just throw them out. It's totally fine. No big deal. I mean, who here likes to wash dishes? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, right? So it makes sense. We bought into it hook, line, and sinker. It makes total sense because we just didn't know. But now we do, right? Now we do. And so as a consequence of this, we see this exponential increase in plastics production. I mean, huge since the end of World War II, to the point in 2015, when the most recent numbers came out, we are making over 300 million tons of this material. That's a unit of mass, ton. Didn't we already talk about the fact that plastic is very light? Just try and contemplate. I mean, I can't even wrap my head around how much plastic you would have to manufacture to even make 1 ton, more or less 300 million tons. And this is a material, as we said, that is extremely durable. So what does happen to it? Where does it go, right? About 50% each year ends up in a landfill. As one of our earlier speakers already brought up, less than 10% of it is recycled. Okay, lots of reasons for that. And that number is only going to get worse because China's not taking it anymore. Okay, but even if you add those two numbers up, that at best represents 60% of the plastic that's manufactured. What about the rest? Well, according to the EPA, it is unaccounted for. I don't know. And now we move on. Certainly some of it is still in use, right? I mean, these chairs were manufactured 1 year and probably are being used for 20, 30 years before they end up in a landfill. So some of it certainly is in use. But the current estimates are that somewhere between 5 and 10% of it each year ends up in our water. And as a topic of scientific research, this really started in the world's oceans, okay, with people seeing big things like bottles and bags and seeing them in the oceans. But in 2004, a United Nations report came out, and 80% of what we're finding in the oceans is actually coming from land. And so the story that we started telling at that point is that plastic bag you see blowing in the wind, right, makes its way into a river. And that flows into a lake, and all of lakes will eventually flow into our oceans. Okay. Yes, this is a real photo, obviously taken for the impact that it's having on anybody in the room. Okay. So we've been saying this since 2004, and yet, despite that, nobody had actually been looking in freshwater systems. Our research group, and then a couple, there was 3 of us at the same time that all had the same thought. We should look in freshwater, but we happen to live on the largest freshwater ecosystem in the world. I want to say that again, okay? Because it's our backyard, I think we forget. It's really easy to not appreciate what you have right in front of you, right? This isn't the largest freshwater ecosystem in the United States. It's not the largest freshwater ecosystem in the Western Hemisphere. It's the largest freshwater ecosystem in the world, the entire planet. And what do we need for life? We can look at the back of your shirt. Water is life, right? Water is life. There is no life without water, and we have more of it than anybody else. Our backyard. right? So we need to be taking care of this. I don't know if we want to survive as a species or something like that. So we decided with money from actually Great Lakes Brewery, so go out and buy a beer tonight, to survey the Great Lakes for plastic pollution. And it was supposed to start off as a fun side project for me, and it kind of consumed my life. Starting at the very beginning of the Great Lakes chain, we see that we already have 7,000 pieces of plastic per square kilometer. As we follow the flow of water into Lake Michigan, that count goes up to 17,000 pieces of plastic per square kilometer. As we go into Lake Erie, that count goes up to 46,000 pieces of plastic per square kilometer. And that water flows over Niagara Falls to Lake Ontario, where the count goes up to 250,000 pieces of plastic per square kilometer. Okay. Lake Erie, Lake Ontario rival the most polluted parts of the world's oceans. But these are our lakes, right? This is us. This is a representation of us, because ultimately we are the source for all of this, right? It wasn't just the counts that really shocked us here, but the sizes. So we break them into 3 different size classes, the smallest being what are the microplastics, things that are smaller than 1 millimeter, mesoplastics, and then macroplastics. And what I really want to impress upon you here is that the vast majority of the plastics we're pulling out of the Great Lakes are incredibly small, okay? So if you go and you look at the lake tonight, you're going to say, I don't see any plastic. That Dr. Mason's just crazy. Right? It's so small, okay? You won't really see it. You can't really kind of appreciate how much is in the water just by looking at the water. But I can tell you, come spend some time in my lab, as my students do, and it will change your world. In addition to the sizes, we also talk about the morphology of the plastics that we find. Fragments are the most common morphology. These are things that obviously broke down from something that was bigger. Okay, sometimes you can figure it out, like there's a piece of a ring from around like a Coke bottle in the corner over there. Other times you just really have no idea. Next, most common at this point in time, hopefully this will change with the Microbeads Free Water Act coming into effect, are pellets. These are perfectly round spherical balls of plastic. So you know that they were manufactured as a pellet. They were manufactured to be round. They don't break down into a perfectly round ball. And when we found these, this is what, led us to looking at what could these possibly be, and led us to basically collect evidence that in fact these are probably coming from these face washes, body washes, right? Toothpastes, and led to the ban on microbeads. And then the hot topic now are microfibers, or lines. So this gives you an idea of some of these fibers. So I know none of us want to think about this, but every article of synthetic clothing that we wear, I know we love them. We love our fleece in the winter, right? There's a study done by Mark Anthony Brown in the UK. Each one of those articles of clothing, every time we wash it, is releasing at a minimum, 1,500 fibers. Minimum. Each article, right? I love my synthetics too. Look, I'm pained as well, right? But this is becoming the hot topic. You find these everywhere. So the pellets, though, and the fibers and the lines, as we started to report on these, we're like, well, we're hypothesizing that they're making their way through wastewater treatment plant. But as a scientist, I don't just hypothesize, I test, right? So we did a wastewater treatment plant study, and I want to thank, since I'm in Cleveland, the city of Cleveland actually did participate in this study, and I thank them for doing that. But we had a total of 17 facilities. We took a total of 90 samples from across the United States, and what we found was that per liter of wastewater, not even one particle, okay, 0.05 of a particle was being released per liter, okay? But you have to look, even our smallest facility was processing over 2 million liters per day. Our largest facility was processing almost 400 million liters per day. So when you account for how much water they're processing, we actually found that each individual wastewater treatment plant in the United States was releasing over 4 million pieces of plastic into United States waterways every day, 365 days a year. There are 15,000 facilities, wastewater treatment facilities in the United States, 15,000, each one releasing over 4 million particles every day into U.S. waterways, okay? And now your head starts to swim, right? Most of these are fibers, right? But we did see the fragments and pellets that are associated with those microbeads that have been banned. Okay. Our next study was to look upstream of the Great Lakes, so looking into the rivers. So these were 29 of the major tributaries into the Great Lakes, going across all of the Great Lakes. So starting up in Lake Superior, and so you have them throughout the region. Looking at different land uses, so developed versus undeveloped land. Okay. And what we found, kind of surface level, is that the amount of plastic coming out of tributaries is higher than what we find in the Great Lakes. This actually wasn't a huge surprise because in a tributary, you're closer to the people, we are the sources, and there's less water for dilution, right? And so your counts are going to be higher per unit volume of water. There was something else I wanted to say here. I don't remember what it was. Okay. We've done some other studies, but now I want to flash forward because I do want to make sure we have time for questions to our most recent studies where we were looking at consumer products. This started with a graduate student I distance mentored out of the University of Minnesota, and she was in the School of Public Health. So we wanted to do a study that at this point in time, when she came and contacted me, there had already been a study done on sea salts, but it was Chinese sea salt. So we wanted to replicate that, but using a sea salt vault in America. There had been a German beer study. I wanted to replicate that, but looking at beer that was brewed using Great Lakes water. Since we know that there's plastic in the Great Lakes, let's look at beer that was brewed using that water. And then the new piece that nobody had done before was to look at tap water. And we actually partnered with Orb Media. And so we collected tap water samples from across the globe, 159 samples that were collected in 14 countries across the planet. And just to kind of give you an overview of what we found really quickly. So in sea salt, we found an average of 212 particles of plastic per kilogram. That's a huge amount of sea salt. Per kilogram of sea salt that we looked at. In beer, we found an average of 4 pieces of plastic per liter of beer, and within our global tap water, 5.5 pieces of plastic per liter of tap water. These results do indicate that beer is better for you than tap water. Just saying. Gotta look for the silver lining wherever you can when you do my line of work. Okay. But these numbers are like, okay, but what does that mean? So to put this into some perspective, we made some assumptions and estimated yearly consumption. So if you follow the World Health Organization guidelines on how much salt you should be ingesting on a daily basis, and no more than that, right? Obviously, less salt is better, okay? But if we said if you just maximize your salt intake, you would be eating 180 pieces of plastic from your sea salt usage each year, okay? If you have 1 beer a day, you would be consuming 500 pieces of plastic in a year, okay? Tap water, if you follow the guidelines on how much tap water you should be drinking, and women, we drink a little bit less than men, so averaged men and women, okay, 50-50, we would be consuming over 5,000 pieces of plastic per year from our tap water. So 88% of our plastic consumption would be coming simply from tap water, okay? Now, I don't know what anybody in the room is thinking, but when this story came out in November-ish, maybe October-ish of last year, I thought people would be shocked and would be like, oh my God, it's in our tap water. We have to solve this problem. And instead they said, oh, it's in tap water. You know what we should do? We should drink more, bottled water. Okay. Oh, sorry. This is fragments versus fibers. Most of it was fibers. Okay. Bottled water. Here we go. I forgot I had that other slide in there. Bottled water. And I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? So somehow packaging water in plastic will make it have less plastic? So all of a sudden, this is what I spent my Christmas break doing. Honestly, that's exactly what happened. I was like, okay, we really need to do this study, and we need to do this study quick. Partnered once again with Orb Media so I could do a global outreach. We processed in our lab 259 bottles of water taken from the top 11 brands from 9 different countries. Now, what we looked at was market. We did a market analysis. So these were the top brands either within the country. So for example, in China, their top selling brand is Wahaha. I don't kid you. I just love saying it, so I always point to China. I always go, Wahaha, Wahaha. Okay, Wahaha cannot be found anywhere else, but it was the top selling brand in China, so we sampled it. Okay, in the United States, our top selling brands are Aquafina, Dasana, and Nestle Pure Life, which happens to also be like number 1, number 2, and number 5 in the world. So we sampled those, and those are not only bottled within the United States, but they are also bottled in other countries in the world. So we also, for I think Aquafina, we also collected, it's also bottled in India. So we bought Aquafina from India and had it shipped here. Okay. Every step along this chain, by the way, was videotaped, because if you're going to take on the bottled water industry, you videotape. Okay, so from the moment it was purchased, entire cases were purchased off of a store shelf, videotaped. It was bought, purchased, it was taken to a facility, packaged, and shipped. All of that was videotaped. We had a videotape feed running 24 hours a day in my lab for 3 months. We got a package, we would open it in front of the camera, and everything that was done in the lab was all videotaped. 24 hours a day. If we were in there in the middle of the night, it was taping, right? So there was like no funny business going on. What did we find? 93% of the individual bottles showed contamination from microplastic pollution, okay? Tap water, that was 88%. So 88% of our tap water samples showed evidence. And here it was 93%, okay? All 11 brands, okay? So for each brand, on average, we typically did 10 bottles per brand. So Nestle Pure Life, we would take 10 bottles from a case of 24, and randomly, those were the ones that we sampled. Okay, one of those bottles may have showed no microplastic, but the other ones did. Okay, so every single brand, but there might be individual bottles within a brand that didn't. Okay, looking at the same size particles that we looked at in the tap water. Okay, for the tap water, we only went down to 100 microns because that's really as small as we can physically move a particle when we're in the lab. And so we only went down to 100 microns, which, by the way, is about the width of a human hair. So you can look at your hair, and that's about how small we were going down to. Okay. In tap water, we found 5.5 particles. In bottled water, over 10. Okay, so twice as much within bottled water as what we found in tap water. Okay, but with this study, this had been 6 months since we did the tap water. Some new information or some new science studies had come out. We decided to use a new method here that allowed us to go to even smaller size particles. We could go down to 6.5 microns. Okay. Those smaller particles, there were on average over 300 of these smaller particles within each liter of bottled water that we tested, okay? So total in each bottle of water, we found 325 pieces of plastic on average in each bottle of water that we tested. Okay, these smaller size particles, this over 300, these particles are so small that they can actually make their way across your gastrointestinal tract, be transmitted within your blood, and be lodged within your organs like your liver, your kidney. They can even make it across the blood-brain barrier and end up in your brain. Okay. So this is why when the World Health Organization got an advanced copy of our report the day before it came out, when it came out, they said, you know what, we should do a human health impact test, right? Because they saw the results and they knew that these really small particles were really worrisome when it comes to people ingesting these and what it might mean in terms of human health, okay? We went further with this study than we have in some of our others. We looked at morphology. I've talked to you guys about morphology here. In the tap water study that we did, fibers made up 98% of the particles that we found. Here in the bottled water, fragments, right? Fragments were the dominant type with fibers being second, okay? What that says to me as a scientist is that this is a different source, right? There's a different source of the plastic that we're finding in the bottled water than what we found in the tap water. Okay, to be honest, I think the tap water, the source is simply the air, which is really difficult to deal with. Here, it's the bottle manufacturing itself. And I have further evidence of that because not only did we look at the shape, we actually analyzed for the type of polymer that these particles were. And we found that polypropylene was the dominant type of plastic that these particles were made of. And that happens to be the same plastic that's used to manufacture the top, the cap. So it could be the simple act of opening that bottle of water could be dropping particles into the bottle itself. The fibers are probably mostly nylon, so you see that nylon. Polystyrene, polyethylene, and polyethylene terephthalate, which is the pest, those are the same plastics that are used to manufacture the bottle. 4% of the particles that we pulled out of these bottled water samples had traces of industrial lubricants. Okay, so all of that led me to conclude that it is quite logical that it's the actual act of bottling the water that's leading to the plastic contamination that is within the bottled water. Okay, so I cannot stress this enough. Tap water is safer than bottled water, okay? And beer is safer still. All right, we have to talk about solutions, and then we'll open it up for questions. And really to talk about solutions, what I want everybody to picture in their mind is that they go home after this evening out, and they come into their kitchen to find this. Somebody's left the kitchen tap on, and there's something clogging the drain, and water is just flowing, and it's all over the floor, and it's making its way into the living room, and it's soaking into the carpet. What are you going to do? I would venture that every single person in this audience is going to do the same thing, and you're going to run over, and you're going to turn off the tap, right? Anybody here going to start cleaning up? Okay, I like to bring that up because when I give these talks, that tends to be where everybody focuses the questions. What are we going to do to clean this up out of our tap water? What are we going to do to clean this out of our Great Lakes? Look, it's not that cleanup is a bad idea, okay? Not that at all. But that's not where you start. You start by turning off the flow, right? And that's where we have to stop. If we're not willing to reduce our use of plastic, it's going to keep flooding into our air and our water and our fish and our beer. I seem to have something on my mind tonight. And our sea salt, right? It's going to be everywhere that we look. So we really have to start by thinking about how we use this material, okay? Because ultimately, we are the problem. Okay, which is depressing, except that it also means that we are the solution. And that's a little bit more like uplifting, right? So if we can really focus on reducing our use of these single-use disposable plastics, that's the biggest piece of the plastics pie. That right there, right? It's that transition, right? It's the Time Life magazine ad, right? Dispose, throw away living, and this transformation from a society of reusing and repurposing and fixing things to one of disposability. And that's what we have to fix. And it's going to take a while, but we can do it. Okay. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your time and invite my fellow people up here, right? And we're going to answer some questions. Yeah?
I have two quick questions. Number one, I was wondering, do the water filters help at all with the plastics? And number two, as a geologist, I wondered what you thought about, I heard it's disgusting, but the plastics are now in the sedimentary rock, sedimentation, and will be the layering of the earth. I wondered what you thought about that.
Okay, we don't know about water filters, honestly. It's one of these questions that I get asked a lot, and I've spoken to a few people about. I think it'd be really interesting to do a study. My gut instinct is that initially a water filter is probably going to be very effective, and then over time, so you have a filter, and plastics get stuck in the filter, but then the more water you push through, it's going to slowly push those plastics through. So I think in the end, ultimately, it's probably a delayed reaction, right? They delay plastics. So instead of it being in the first glass of water, it's in your fifth glass of water or something like that. Your second question, I am the chair of the Department of Geology. I'm not a geologist. How I became department chair is a very weird, windy, kind of twisted path. I'm actually a chemist, and I became chair because I was in charge of the environmental sciences program, and geology needed a chair, and so I was like, okay, sure, I like the planet. So I'm not a geologist. I just want to make very clear that I don't want to try and pretend myself to be something that I'm not. It definitely is in the sedimentary record, though. I have friends who are geologists who do sediment analysis, and actually I showed you counts from the surface of the Great Lakes. There's actually higher counts in the sediment of the Great Lakes than there is in the surface. The reason for that is twofold. One is that half of the plastics that we manufacture float. Those would be the pieces I would collect. Half of them sink because they're made to be more dense than water, so they'll end up in the sediment. In addition to that, as plastic is in the water, microorganisms will habitate the surface of the plastic, forming what's called a biofilm, right? Kind of like the way that we habitate the surface of this planet, right? We call it Earth, right? So, and they'll have babies and build houses and, create aqueducts or something. Now, so they live on the surface of the plastic, and that increases the density, and then the plastic will eventually sink, right? So there's actually more plastic in the sediments of the Great Lakes than there are on the surface.
63 years ago when I was in college at Case, the subject came up in the course in organic chemistry. How do you get rid of the plastic? We can't, not easily. So what would you recommend? This is the prof of the department. High temperature incineration, burn it. Only problem is 9,000 degrees, and we don't have that technology. So that's something to think about, get rid of it. The other thing, currently, like Sunny Simon brought up, a charge. Every liter of whatever has a quarter or something charge on it, so it'll go back somewhere. I don't care if it's a plastic bag, whatever it is. A straw, 10 cents, 20 cents. You find it lying around, somebody's going to pick it up, there's 20, 30 cents. So that's a start. But I think it should be universal. It won't happen because we don't have legislatures that will act on something like that. We all know that. They're bought and paid for. So it's just a thought. A charge a deposit. Years ago, we used to buy pop quart containers, return them. They were glass. Glass lasts. So see what somebody's opinion is on a high deposit for whatever we buy. A liter of water, whatever it is.
So there is some technology, mass burn technology. For instance, Covanta in Indianapolis operates a waste-to-energy facility. I don't know the science, but it's my understanding that the emissions are very clean, and the pollution control equipment makes that relatively effective. But again, I'm not a scientist on that. We don't have that type of technology here in Ohio because landfilling is so cheap that that type of technology can't compete price-wise with the cheap landfilling. As far as deposit legislation, that was beat down here in Ohio, I think in the 70s. There was similar charges per bottle, similar to New York and Michigan. Here in Ohio, and the lobbying people fought that down. So instead, we had House Bill 592 and the development of solid waste districts and this voluntary promotion of recycling. But deposit laws assume that there's markets for that material. And I think what we really need to look at is more producer responsibility, where the companies that make all this stuff that is foisted upon us, that we're forced to buy because we have no choice, because we need that product, they have some more of a stake in the game. And we start to assess the full cost of that material when you buy that item, when we take into the life cycle cost of that. So.
I just want to add that in the political climate today, it's very difficult to pass anything. I was studying Michigan actually last week, and it was just a different climate. But right now we have a state legislative body that has 2 bills pending to preempt what we're doing, and what Dale Miller and my bill are. They're out there with a House bill and a Senate bill ready to preempt our home rule as a charter county to allow us to address the bags in Cuyahoga County. So right now, in both the Senate and the House, they got wind of this. The plastic lobbies ran right down there, and retail, it's not just the plastic, to preempt our home rule. So even if I can get this passed, I'm going to be facing a statewide issue, and I'm looking at not giving up and looking at an initiative statewide in 2020.
You mentioned fleece as one of the fabrics that was really bad as far as fiber is concerned. Can you tell us which things are the safest and which others, additional ones, are bad?
Well, you want to be looking for natural fibers, so cotton, organic cotton preferably, because so much pesticide is used in the manufacture of cotton, hemp. So those are, natural fibers like that is what you would ideally be looking toward. It's very difficult right now because, what was that? Wool, yes, wool, linen. Oh, thank you guys. So your synthetics are, polyesters, spandex. I mean, we all love our yoga pants. I know nobody wants to give up their yoga pants. I don't really like to talk about the fibers because it makes it sound like I wear these things, and I love these things. What I think to tackle microfibers, I think it's going to be a multifaceted approach, right? Patagonia is kind of leading the way in terms of thinking about ways that we can still have synthetic fabrics, but maybe they won't shed as much. And I think that's one aspect of it. I think another aspect could be installing filters on washing machines, the same way we have filters on dryers. Things like the Cora ball, which is something that you drop into your washing machine that these fibers get tangled up in. I think that's probably, we need something like that in addition to the filter, because I think we're going to need multiple kind of phases of this. So I think that would be good as well. And I do think that we need additional testing in order to understand, oh yeah, there's a Cora ball. Yeah, so you throw this in your washing machine and then the fibers get tangled in it and you use it for a while and then you send it back to them? No. You just clean it off and then throw it away. Okay. Cora, C-O-R-A, Cora ball.
It's biomimicked after coral.
You throw it in your washing machine when you wash your clothes and the microfibers that shed off your clothes get tangled in it. And then you clean off the fibers and you throw them in the trash can.
Where do you buy that?
Go online. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, you can't buy them in stores, that, to my knowledge. So I think that those are all kind of aspects. And then in addition, understanding, that the human health kind of angle of it, maybe we don't need to be concerned about microfibers. I don't think that's probably true, but, I don't want to, yeah, so. Yeah, but so I think that there might be multiple aspects. But yes, I do preferentially use natural materials where I can, right? And so that was the question. We have other hands going up all over the place. So.
I have a question. I'm an artist, and I'm currently working with recycled plastics. In my community of Lakewood, the gas company is replacing the old iron gas pipes with polyethylene pipes. They're bright yellow. And a little research, I found that once these plastics degrade, they emit wormhouse gases. And I'm wondering, how do those gases affect the gas, the fuel, the heating fuel, the cooking fuel that we use daily? What would that do when they break down, the polyethylene material?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry. I wish I had a good answer for you. I don't know. It's a very durable material. These things are going to take centuries to degrade, but I don't know what the impact on fuel would be. So I don't really have a good answer. Polyethylene ultimately is coming from natural gas. So if you're talking about transmitting natural gas through it, I really wouldn't be concerned of the impact it's having on the natural gas. I have had lots of people ask about, plastic plumbing in their homes, which I can understand would be a concern. Not so much the pipes, but the joints of where they join together, because if anybody's taken and screwed some of those plastic pipes together, you see that little shards of plastic come off. And so, could they be contributing some to plastic within your own home tap water supply? It's possible. Majority of what we found were fibers. And so when I've talked to water facilities, it seems to me that the source of the contamination in our study was largely coming from the air. And so that makes it much more difficult. I don't think our water infrastructure people can be doing anything more really than what they're doing. I don't really put the onus on them. I really go back to extended corporate responsibility in that regard.
Thank you. As long as you just mentioned air, I was going to ask a question about, I know this is the purpose of your talk, but terrestrial sources and concentrations of microplastic pollution. Are there been any studies as far as the content of 2.5 air quality and what component of that actually is plastic materials?
There haven't been actually that many studies on air, and I think there are people starting to kind of catch on to that. I know of two. One was done in Paris, and that's the most kind of well-known, where they put out filters and they just let things settle. So we do know that these things are a component in air. There's no doubt about it. How much and is it more concentrated, and what are the sources? Those are questions that there's very few studies, so that's something that really needs to be done more, I think. Looking, for example, at laundry facilities like, laundromats, right? And looking at their air emissions, I think would be, or places where fabrics are manufactured, and looking at their air emissions. Those would be the two main ones that I would think of in terms of kind of sources into the air.
have a question for Sunny, if you don't mind. So, given the resistance in the state legislature to your plastic bag ban, Governor Kasich is on his way out. He doesn't really face any political risk by vetoing something like this. What do you think the chances are that he would not let that go and pass into law?
I think it's unlikely we would get a veto out of Governor Kasich, considering his political aspirations at this time. But hopefully we will have somebody more amenable to veto.
Okay.
And so we'll be looking at some action after November.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Mason, do you know if reverse osmosis removes plastics from the water?
So I don't. That was with that filter question, right?
Okay.
The most common filter that is used actually is reverse osmosis. So no, there have been no studies that have looked at different filtering mechanisms to see which are more or less effective, and that would be the primary one to look at.
And this is for Sunny. Every week I go shopping at Heinen's and I come home with several plastic bags, which I subsequently use for garbage. What am I going to do if there are no more plastic bags?
Well, right now it's a fee. You have an opportunity, if you wanted to, under the current version, to purchase a bag for 10 cents. But I think you would find ways to do things differently with your plastic bags, perhaps use them over and over. You would do things differently, or you would have to buy them. I have a dog. I have several cats. I run a rescue operation, South Euclid Humane. And believe you me, I've had to think long and hard about how will I handle dog waste and cat litter. And I will figure it out, and slowly I am. I buy bags that are compostable for my dog, even though they're not going to compost necessarily, but they're not going to be made from petroleum-based material. So we just have to change. I don't know what you did before plastic, or anybody did before it, but we all figured it out. And there's enough around the planet right now, or in the cupboards at the county administration building, that would probably keep you in business for the next couple decades. Right. So thank you.
Yes, with all these microplastics and so on in the water, there's not just a question of us drinking the water, but the various organisms that live in it are eating this, they're breathing it, they're passing it through their gills. The filter feeders are definitely processing it, and so on and so forth. Is there any evidence or studies that would indicate what the ecological impact of this is to the organisms themselves, and then of course on us, because we then eat the fish, which are going to have these microplastics, I would presume, within the flesh that we eat, or the other organisms that we eat from the marine environment.
Correct. So there have been quite a few, actually. You can Google some videos looking at plankton, showing plankton eating plastic. We are just finishing up our own similar study where we looked at freshwater plankton, and do they eat microbeads? Yes. Do they eat fibers? Yes. And the idea being that they then transmit them up the food chain. That work actually started, I skipped over our fish study, but we looked at 25 species of fish from the Great Lakes, predominantly Lake Erie, and the double-crested cormorant. Every species of fish that we looked at had plastic in its gastrointestinal tract. It did not occur to me, because I'm not a biologist, to look in the gills, and I kicked myself for that. But there was one study that has come out that did look at the gill structure and show that there are plastics within the gill, and even just stuck within the mucous membrane that coats the outer surface of the fish. I don't know that anybody's looked in the fish tissue itself, or that the part of the fish that we eat. But my biggest concern with plastic is not actually plastic itself. It's the chemicals that are in and on the plastic. So when plastics are manufactured, I focused on the polymers, but actually I think it's really important that people understand that plastic is not just the polymer. Plastic, one of the reasons it makes it so difficult to recycle is because plastic is a mixture. It's the polymer mixed with plasticizers, mixed with colorants, mixed with UV stabilizers, flame retardants. I mean, there's just so many chemicals. In fact, some plastics are only 30% polymers. There's 70% all this other stuff. Right? And so it makes it really difficult to recycle plastic, because plastic isn't one thing. It's actually thousands of different things, right? And so it makes it really difficult to recycle. So you have all of these chemicals in the plastic from the moment it's manufactured. And when plastic is in water, it actually absorbs all of these other chemicals. We know Cuyahoga River 50 years ago, right? Almost. The Great Lakes were a dumping ground for industrial chemicals since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And many of those pollutants are still present, even though, for example, PCBs were banned in the 1970s, still in the water. And we find them on the surface of our plastics, right? So when those particles are ingested, those chemicals can desorb or end up in the organisms that ingest those chemicals. And this has been shown to happen. And as there are studies that have looked at the impacts on fish that ingest plastics, for example, their motility goes down. So they tend to be, since they're not moving as quickly, they tend to be eaten more readily because they don't have that ability to get away from prey fish. And so then those chemicals are going to move up the food chain. We know that those chemicals are in humans. There's no doubt about that. We know the impacts those chemicals are having on humans. Okay, so we know that these chemicals are endocrine disruptors. We know that the hormone, which is a hormone mimic, many of them are carcinogens, mutagens, teratogens. They have been associated with things that we are seeing happening in the human population. There's no doubt that these things are happening. Sperm counts are going down. Men are becoming feminized. Your penises are getting smaller. Sorry, true, happening generationally. Okay. Women, we're hitting puberty earlier, which means that we see a earlier onset. Because of the earlier puberty, we see higher incidences of breast cancer and ovarian cancer. It's also been associated with ADHD and autism and obesity in children under the age of 6 months. These are known human health impacts. The question that remains is the connection between, we know the plastics are in the water, we know they pick up these chemicals, we know the chemicals are in people, we know that the impacts that they're having on the people. We don't know how much of the chemicals that are in us are coming from the plastics. That's the only piece that's missing, right? Because we don't know how much we're ingesting of these plastics. Nobody's cut open a human and said, how many plastics are in them? Okay, I've had some older people volunteer to give me their bodies when they pass away, but I keep turning them away. So that's the only piece that's missing, right? But we know it's happening. Okay, so we have enough evidence to really push us to make changes.
I would like to know how successful they are developing the microbes to break down the plastics. I know that that's been a project for a couple years, and I just wanted to know how that was going, and would it be successful in the Great Lakes?
Okay, so that's not something you wouldn't release these microbes into the lakes. It's something that would be done so if we say we collected plastics and we want to get rid of them, right? And then we would have these microbes. It's happening on a laboratory scale that is very different than an industrial scale, and there's no way to bring it up to an industrial scale size as of yet. And it really comes back to supply and demand, where once again we continue to use this stuff and use this stuff and use this stuff, and we always have more of a supply of these materials than I think we can readily look at something like, oh, these microbes that we genetically modify are going to save us from this, right? This is really, again, where we need, that might be a solution if we can bring down our use, right? It might be a solution on a small scale, but it's not going to save us from ourselves. At the current rate, that exponential increase has not diminished at all. Right? And if we just keep exponentially increasing our plastics, it's not going to help, right? So it might help on a small scale. Similarly, like the development of true biodegradable plastics, the ones that we're using here tonight are compostable, but only in an industrial composting facility. You can't take these home and put them in your backyard compost pile. They're not going to go away. A true bioplastic would. right? And there are people who are looking at those alternatives too. And I think that is a future growth. But again, it's not going to solve the problem, right? It's a multifaceted problem that's going to need multifaceted solutions. And a big part of that solution is reduce. That's step number one. And then we can talk about these other solutions as well.
Well, frankly, I think in this country, we're not going to see that type of legislation and outright product bans, unfortunately, with the climate we have here. But I think other nations are doing it. We're behind. But whole countries are banning single-use plastics and plastic bags and plastic straws and plastic utensils. Yet we can't even get a plastic bag ban here in Cuyahoga County.
Can't get a fee. So France hasn't had plastic bags for years. You go there, there's no plastic bags. So we're trying. I'm trying with a fee, but we'll see.
One last question.
Just one more comment to that, though. I think, this skip the straw thing seems to be taking on, taking off. And that's really encouraging. So I think it's going to be more of a bottom-up movement, and it's going to be this reaction and this backlash against all this stuff that will come from the ground up, and that comes from all of us. So,
is there an alternative to the straw solution for those people who are finding it difficult to give up their straws? Is there other material that? Thank you.
Yes. There are many different options for straw. I know I carry in my purse a metal straw. I've heard of bamboo straws. There's paper straws. I've even heard of the pasta straws. So there are a lot of different options.
I want to thank our panel very much. Dr. Lehn, Director Bickett, Sunny Simon, and Dr. Mason. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.